Hello, everyone, and welcome to the ICAP seminar on Women of Color in Policymaking, Real Participation or Simply Representation. I'm Fritz Mayer, Dean of the Korbel School of International Studies here at the University of Denver. Really honored to be moderating today's panel. Let me say first just a few words about ICAP, which is the acronym for the International Career Advancement Program, which is now entering its 27th season, a program for primarily for persons of color in international affairs that we've hosted here at the Korbel School for all these years, now with over 800 alumni, which is just extraordinary, and in many ways has been changing the face of American foreign policy and related fields. So very proud to be host of ICAP and delighted to be having another one of our ICAP seminars. Though with us today, we have an extraordinary panel to discuss the topic. And let me introduce them actually in order of their year in which they were ICAP fellows, all three veterans of the program, which we run every year in Aspen. So ICAP 1997, which was the first year of the program, we have Ambassador Gina Abercrombie-Winstanley, who has had an extraordinary career in international affairs, currently serves as the president of the Middle East Policy Council. Prior to that, she served as the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for the Department of State. And she had a 30-year plus career as a diplomat, including being the longest serving U.S. ambassador to the Republic of Malta. So welcome, Ambassador. Good to have you with us. ICAP 1998, Yumi Sera, who is currently head of the Office of Community Partnerships and Strategic Communication in the California Governor's Office of Planning and Research in Sacramento. Her previous positions included serving as Deputy Director of Statewide Initiatives at the California Complete Count Census 2020, and has also had an extraordinary career in public service. Welcome, Yumi. And third, we have Elmira Bayrasli, ICAP 1999. So we have first, second, and third year of the ICAP program with us today, which is just extraordinary. Mira is director of the Bard College Globalization and International Affairs program in Annandale-on-Hudson, New York. She's taught there for several years. She's also co-founder of Foreign Policy Interrupted and the host of Project Syndicate's podcast, Opinion Has It. So welcome, Elmira. It's great to have all of you here. Unfortunately, our fourth panelist, Professor Nazneen Barma, is ill. Naz is the director of our Policy Institute, the Scrivener Policy Institute here at the Korbel School. And she sends her regrets, but unfortunately is under the weather. So let's launch into it. For all of you in the audience, we'll have a discussion amongst ourselves for the first 45 or 50 minutes or so. And then we will open for questions. So if you would put your questions in the Q&A, and we will get to as many of them as we can. Thank you all for joining us today. So let me just start with the challenges that you've all certainly faced, both early in your career and perhaps also as you moved up into leadership positions, moved up the ladder as it were. Talk a bit about the form those challenges took for you. All of you, entering certainly in foreign affairs, but in public life, certainly at the time you entered it, and still today, fields dominated with people were like me, white male fields. If you would share some of your personal experiences, and let me start with, as I say, I'll go in order of seniority again one more time, but Ambassador Abercrombie-Winstanley, let me start with you and just reflect a bit on the challenges you faced in your career.
Yeah, well, I think for many of us who come from underrepresented groups, and that's everybody but white guys, it is walking into spaces and, number one, finding a level of comfort in that space, and then taking up all of it that you deserve to take up. I came in at a time when there were very few people who looked like me in the Department of State. Those who did were most often found in support positions, incredibly important ones, but I had to explain myself in ways that my white male colleagues, even my Black male or men of color colleagues in suit and ties didn't have to do. The female uniform was not quite as clear for professional level versus something else. So I didn't have those sorts of shortcuts to say, okay, I'm here as a diplomat, as an officer, as opposed to one of the important support functions. So there is that. I learned, even if I didn't act on it immediately, fairly early on, as I listened in the room, and I went in with the idea that I need to go in and listen and learn before I speak, like many women, knowing 50% or 60% of what's going on, 80% not sufficient to really make my views known. I feel like I need to know it all. I used to feel that way. I don't feel that way anymore at all, because I listened to the men in the room and realized they didn't know any more than I did. So it took me a while to cotton on to that. And then it took me even longer to act on that. One of the things I did learn and hoped to see from others in the room is that allies, from whatever background, that we help amplify each other. And this is something that's been really important in my career, and something I share with others so that we can amplify each other, because that business about, you say it and it falls like, the tree in the forest, and then someone with more testosterone than I says it, and suddenly it can be heard. I also found some phrases to use when that happened. So if somebody said something that I had said already, that I would interject, not showing how pissed I was, but certainly saying, Tom, thank you so much for repeating what I just said. Or Andrew, I love that you understood my meaning. I love that you understood where I was coming from as I was saying blah, 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 and interject and take the mic back, as it were. So those are challenges and how I dealt with them.
That's great. Well, we'll pick up on some of those particular themes, but let me turn to ask Yumi the same question. Maybe you will also pick up on some of those themes, but your reflections.
Yeah, thank you, Gina. I was like, yes, yes, and yes. And I think it's really sad that we've been here for, the three of us at least have been here for a couple decades, or 2 or 3. And yet where we started, we're still women of color, and women are still experiencing these kinds of issues daily in the workforce. And so the fight still goes on, but at the same time, also, Gina, thanks for recognizing my mom. She was a secretary in the Malta American Embassy. So, I think in a way, I also learned from my mom, my single mom, who was a Foreign Service, State Department secretary, who really, she never complained, but really, that I imagine what now, knowing what I know, what she had gone through in her position, and how she was treated. But we I think with these challenges and the barriers we come across, we also build on those and figure out how we overcome them in a way. So just having a really strong learning streak of, okay, that worked, that didn't work. What just happened, when this question was posed to us yesterday, I was thinking, okay, what were those barriers, or what do you really, and maybe rephrase it in a way like, what do you, especially the students in the Zoom room now, who might be going into careers in foreign affairs, it's like, what do you need to watch out for, right? Because it's not always evident what's happening in that room, or did that person really say the same thing I just said? You know, it's not always that obvious. And so, and you never know, and I at least didn't know, was it because I'm a woman? Was it because of my age? I mean, I worked at the World Bank, so age and white hair was very important. That's what I was told when I went to lodge my complaint and said, well, why don't you like dye your hair a little bit white so that, you know, you have a little bit more credibility. Okay, so I don't know if it was my gender, if it was my race, if it was my age, or if it was what my perceived experience was, because I didn't come with the same kind of experience as others might have. So what's not said is also, you know, the stuff that you can't see above the surface, that little iceberg analogy of what's really underneath that surface is really what you really need to look out for. And that's that. And well, I think our next questions will address how we're able to address some of that, but really looking at your context and looking at just being aware of what's going on and knowing as much about context as possible.
Well, thank you for sharing that, and we will pick up on some of the strategies, and obviously you've all had strategies to address the phenomenon that you're talking about. But let me bring Elmira in as well to ask you what. And I assume a lot of this resonates with your own experiences, but also other thoughts that you might have about the challenges you faced.
I'm going to bring in another fellow ICAPper. I remember him talking C.D. Glynn, who's now the head of the Pepsi Foundation. And I remember him, he's done a number of things in government, and he was dispatched to South Africa. And he landed, and he's going to an event, and the people greeting him are saying, you know, when's the representative from the embassy going to come? And he's like, well, I'm the representative. And they're kind of looking at him because he's a Black guy. And I think it really, when he talked about that, that really hit home for me, because there is the foreign policy world, which is pale male and Yale. Predominantly, I think it is changing and evolving, and I'm happy to see that. But I think that at least when the three of us were ICAP fellows and getting into this field and starting out in our careers, I think there was this sense of who were the policymakers in foreign policy, and they were generally white men. And I know from my own experience, I mean, I look different, I have a different name, and I think the challenges that I faced, in addition to being young and naive, is not having the same experiences as kind of the white privileged men did. You know, I didn't come from money. My parents are immigrants. So I didn't go to summer camp, and I didn't go to private schools, and I didn't, you know, we didn't do any of those things. And so off the bat, I thought I was at a disadvantage. And so you automatically, I think you suffer from a lot of naivete, but then you also have imposter syndrome. And a lot of that imposter syndrome is driven by you having to justify why you are at the table or you are in the room, because a lot of the questions that I think women get, and particularly women of color get, is less so about the reasoning for the positions that they hold, but is what makes you qualified to actually be at this table. And so I know that I answer a lot more questions about, well, who are you, and you know, where is your family from, and what is your background? And it's emotionally tiring. It's emotionally draining, and I do consider it to be a microaggression. Now, I don't want to say that people shouldn't be curious about one another and where we come from and where we live, and I think those experiences form who we are. But I think it is a particularly sensitive thing when you are talking about a professional setting, and you are actually talking about policy making. I think groupings like ICAP really do help dismantle kind of the barriers in your own mind about, am I good enough to be here?
Mhm.
And the unqualified answer is yes, you are. And I'm happy to get into a little bit more, but I think at least for me, it is, kind of battling that imposter syndrome and having to answer questions that I think a lot of white men just naturally don't have to encounter.
Yeah, no, I can begin to imagine that if I probably am not queried. Because I'm the default, or people who look like me are the default expectation, whereas you have to answer those questions. Let me pick up on a couple of things. One, reflecting on some of the questions that our students had wanted me to ask on their behalf. One has to do with really intersectionality. I mean, you've touched on this, both being persons of color and being women. How does that, can you comment on how those two, those work together, the way in which each of those identities or the intersectionality of them affects the way in which people, at least initially, react to you, ask you questions, have trouble realizing that you're actually the person they should be talking to and not someone else. And we take it in order. Maybe we'll go in reverse. I'll start with you, Elmira.
Sure. So I at Bard I started teaching this new class called Feminist Foreign Policy. And I start out by looking at, well, what is feminism? And we take a look at kind of the second wave feminist movement and the literature from that. But I have also my students read definitions from the Global South. And I have them read Bell's Hooks, who really talk about how feminism is not it's not one thing. And when you're talking about feminism, there is, I think, kind of the white feminist lens. And we have to understand that feminism can be different things to different people. And I think it is very different for women of color. And I think it goes to, again, the experiences that we have and the challenges that we face. I think it is important to talk about intersectionality precisely because of that and because of the different experiences that women of color face around the world. And when you're talking about a lot of the issues globally, particularly today, when we look at climate change, when we're looking at global pandemics, and when we're looking at extremism and poverty, women are really the ones that are disproportionately impacted by those transnational issues. War is another one where women are disproportionately impacted. And we really need to be kind of informed that the perspectives of how they see things and the solutions to them are very different. And it's very important not to kind of break it down into this, I'm going to use probably a very bad analogy, black and white, and make sure that we understand that it's very multidimensional and to actually getting in a lot of those different perspectives.
Thank you for that. And Yumi, if you'd like to comment on that as well. And
thank you for asking the question. I mean, in my day job, or well, what I do most of the week is I'm a governor's appointee, the governor of California appointee to create and run the new Office of Community Partnerships and Strategic Communications. And so with this privilege also comes a lot of weight and a lot of promise and a lot of opportunity, a little bit of craziness, must admit. But one of the things that I was able to do was I was able to bring the topic of intersectionality into conversation at a webinar that we did last month. And the way we explored that was more about how we do outreach to our marginalized and vulnerable communities in California, in the state of California. How do we talk to them? How do we engage with them? And these are comments coming from our audience saying, my colleague Caleb, who talked about tribes are not a monolith, or Asians are not a monolith. We're all these different, there's all these different kinds of identities that we bring to a problem or a solution, and the way you engage with me really it's complex, right? It's we deal with a lot of refugee and immigrant communities in our state, obviously, or with people whose first language is not English, who speak mostly a different language in their homes, from like Burmese to Haitian Creole or to Spanish. And so when we look at intersectionality from my work perspective, really, is really looking at ensuring that we are really looking at a diverse way of engaging with our communities, and making sure that really we do reach what we call the most vulnerable communities in our state.
No, thank you for that. And Ambassador, would your thoughts on this?
You know, intersectionality is hard. It is so often coming up against whose victimhood is more traumatic, longer lived, more deeply held, etc. It's something that I struggled with in my final position at the Department of State, trying to reassure people who are not immediately like me that the work of inclusion, of ensuring that there's a level playing field, of making sure that everybody has an equal opportunity, if not an equal outcome, believed it. It is hard. I was raised to believe that my Blackness was likely more important than my womanhood. My dad used to say, deal with things as people are going to recognize them about you. And as you are walking from a distance, they're going to see you're a human being, but the next thing they're going to see is your color. If you're in a hat and coat, then they may see that you're female. So recognize that you're going to have to deal with your Blackness first. As a diplomat, I would argue that I had to deal more often with being female, that it was more of a challenge, but probably because I chose to specialize in the Middle East, and I had plenty of male American colleagues who like the Middle East because of the sexism that is rampant in that part of the world. And so I might do very well once I stepped out of the embassy and faced many challenges from my colleagues, not my interlocutors outside the embassy. So I have a lot of thoughts on this one, as you can tell. As we try and navigate intersectionality, I use the word grace, something that we all have to extend to each other, to give the benefit of the doubt, at least the first and second time, because we all screw up, we all microaggress, we all can microaggress against each other, you know, Blacks against Jews, Jews against those with disabilities against those who are gay, etc. We all do it, we all can do it. So it's something that we have to be reminded of. We know we come from different perspectives, but we have to be reminded that everybody else does as well, and recognize the cost when we don't hold on to that intersectionality is that we all lose. I'll stop there.
Thank you for that. So I was reflecting that we had Ambassador Thomas Greenfield to speak at the school, and she was asked by one of our students essentially the question I've been asking you. It's what but it was a little more pointed as isn't it really difficult to be a woman of color representing the United States? And her comment back was really fascinating, and I wanted to get you to respond to that. So she thought, oh no, she said it's actually an asset to be a person of color, at least in terms of her ability to engage in many arenas where, in fact, that are not, are not dominantly white, But beyond that, a sense that her identity gave her an ability to relate to and understand and empathize with and engage with others in ways that were very helpful to her. So I'm curious, not in any way to dismiss or diminish the challenges you face, but whether in what ways your identities have been or can be an asset to you in your careers. And I don't know who would like to respond to that. You can reject the premise as well, but I was just really curious to kind of to turn the question a little bit.
Yeah, I'll start and try and be brief. I agree wholeheartedly with Linda. It has always been an asset in my work. It has allowed me to make connectivity with a range of people around the world, and most importantly, certainly in diplomacy in many different fields, I guess other for your US military, that you're going into spaces where you need to negotiate. You need to get people to your side. You need to make friends. And as women, as minorities of whatever sort, we are used to walking into rooms, into powerful spaces, and not being the most powerful person in the room. And having to find that connectivity to exude respect and understanding for the other, which I think makes us more successful in the long and short run as well. So I think she's absolutely right. And I get annoyed. So whoever asked that question, do not acknowledge who you are. When people ask me, isn't it hard to be a Black woman? No, it is not. It is not. We come with skills and space taking. It is not. It's been a joy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yumi or
Sure. I like being in the middle because I can bounce off of everybody's ideas here. But I think it goes back also to the question of, is it real participation or representation? The title of this webinar. And I take representation very seriously. When I first got appointed to this position, and I was in a big room with 100 people. This was during COVID, so it was like a little bit post-COVID. We had a room full of about 100 people. So I was up there for the first time representing both our office, the governor, and the state of California in the work that we're doing. And this was mostly staff and partners. And a woman came up to me, and I think an Asian American, a Japanese American woman came up to me in my generation and just said to me and the two other Asian women on stage, is that it's so important to have you there to represent us as a woman or as an Asian. And that has come to, that sort of sentiment and people saying that to me has happened over and over again in different ways, just from the communities who I asked, or the community-based organizations who I work with and engage with, and I asked them, what do you want us to do at our office? And it was, when we're not at the table, when we don't have a seat at that table, make sure you represent us. So for me, I take it very seriously who I am and how I carry myself, how I know that I'm not just me or an executive director or other labels, a woman or an Asian or whatever it is, but really that I do represent a community of people who don't usually see themselves either at the table or in a leadership position. So it's not always easy, obviously, but it's something that I'm very conscious of when I step in front of people.
Nice. Thank you for that. Yeah. Elmira, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Yumi. I think representation is very important. I think it is important for people to see who's at the table, and when people see themselves reflected, I think it gets them engaged. I think there is a sense of participation. I see it with my students when there are young women of color in my classes. You know, they always say how important it is for them to see a woman of color in the classroom. So I think representation is important.
We've lost you for the moment there. We'll
We so want to know what she's going to say
no, and
next.
she's in mid sentence. So apologies for the technical difficulties. Hopefully, we'll get you back shortly. We'll see. I'm not sure what's happened to that but appreciate the comments so far. We'll come back to Elmira on the question of representation. Let me I think she'll pop back in a second. Let me turn to something you've already been talking about in lots of ways. That is the ways in which all of you have been, tremendously successful in your careers and done amazing things. So the ways in which you've navigated the challenges, the invisibility in the room, the assumptions about who's really the important person, the assumptions, the biases that you've biased assumptions that people have made, I'm sure all your careers and still today in many ways. I'm going to start back with you, Gina, if I could, because you started talking about some of what I thought were really nice ways of handling the phenomenon of people, taking your ideas. But maybe you could elaborate a bit on both that and other ways that the other strategies that you've had to, as you say, to be present, to take up the space in the room.
Yeah. I cannot urge folks to do hard enough to do that. It is really important, because if you don't, somebody else will take your space. Absolutely. There are enough extroverts out there in the world who are just ready to spread their wings and take up all the space. So yes, as I said, not getting angry, but taking back the mic, and having others help me do it, and helping others do it. So if I hear someone else who made a point and not get credit for it, I will serve that person as well in that way. We heard this before from Anne or Jamal, and maybe we can make sure that we are on the same page there, because it sounded good there. Are we hearing the same thing, Jamal? Blah, blah. So, doing it that way. It's hard to disappear in a room as a woman of color, I think, certainly as a Black woman, and if only because we were out there in color. I had to navigate my wardrobe more than my colleagues who were European American background. I had to navigate my wardrobe of the decision making of, am I going to wear my hair in a European style, or am I going to do whatever I want to do with it today? And those of you who have African American women friends know that our hair can look very different day to day. And I know for some people, you lose a little bit of yourself if you have to make a decision about wearing your hair straight or with chemicals in it. Or do you lose a little bit because people are questioning your bona fides or your right to be in the room or in that position because you're wearing your hair naturally? And what's more important that day or at that time, or what's more important to you? All of those things have occurred through my career. I remember the first time I wore my hair in braids. I'd seen one other woman in the Department of State in braids, and she looked fantastic. fantastic. And I think I went and got my hair braided the next weekend after I saw her. But I was a special assistant for the Deputy Secretary of State at the time. So 7th floor job, a lot of people seeing me. And I remember the secretary seeing me the next morning on that Monday and saying, "Good God, your hair." And his next question was, "How long did that take?" Now, was that any of his business? No, it was not. But I did answer the question. And I know for many women, particularly those wearing hair naturally, the issue of, do you let people touch your hair? Do you not let and how you navigate all of those little bits and things. In the end, you've got to do it with what feels right for you, because you are the only one who sleeps with you every night, right? So if you go home and feel less than, or that you didn't defend yourself or stand for yourself. And I don't know if I've been called an angry Black woman. I've certainly been an angry Black woman. I have used profanity with people because I've dealt with my share of sexual harassment over the years, and have threatened colleagues with not keeping their hands where their hands ought to be. So I dare say they commented on me being an angry Black woman out of earshot. But in the end, as I said, I have to sleep with myself. I have to live with myself, and being true to myself, plus knowing my business, knowing what I bring to the table, being able to advocate for myself without hesitation, with confidence, has stood me in excellent stead. And so I urge you all to be true to yourselves.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, and welcome back, Elmira.
Sorry, my internet died.
Yeah,
Oh.
you were in mid comment.
Yeah.
Representation. Maybe we can ask you to finish that, and then we'll turn to just pose the question really about strategies that each of you have had in your very successful careers to navigate the challenges that you've identified. But perhaps let me come back to you to let you finish your thought on representation. If it's still with you at this point.
Well, I know I was talking about Bill Burns's book, The Back Channel.
You were about to. Okay.
You were about to. Yeah, we hadn't heard that part. So yeah, tell us about that.
And so I was reading this, and he gets into the policy planning office in his early 30s, and then he's an assistant secretary by the time he's in his mid 30s. And he's done a couple of ambassadorships. Sorry, I live in New York City, so this is a regular fire alarms. And I just thought to myself, and then you read things from people, you read about Richard Holbrooke or Ben Rhodes, and I just think to myself, I don't think a woman or a woman of color could have ever been in those positions. We just have always had to work harder and prove ourselves more. And so going back to this question of, is it an asset? I definitely, again, I'm proud of who I am, and I wouldn't change that. But, do I think it's hard? Yeah, I think it's hard. And I think it's grating. And so Gina, I jumped in at the end when you're talking about, being cast as an angry Black woman. I've been cast as an angry woman too. But I think that one of the reasons that we become angry is because we have to fight so much harder, and we have to prove ourselves to be taken seriously. And a lot of times I just think it's unfair because, Gina, you pointed out, sometimes I'm in these rooms and these men say things and I'm just like, that was really stupid. And it's stunning to me that, they get the slap on the back and, the attaboy, and, we're there and we're fighting, to get scraps. And the thing that I hate the most is that they've created a system where they also want us to compete with one another. And, I, on a personal level, refuse to do that, because I think, my competition is with myself. Can I be better? Can I be better tomorrow than I was today? And it shouldn't be with other women, but particularly with other women of color. And I don't think that there should be a quota on, how many of us are represented in that.
I mean,
If I could just, sorry, I just wanted to,
please jump in. Yeah.
what Linda was saying and what I was saying about is it hard to be a woman of color in the space? I think both of us were talking about the work itself, as opposed to dealing with the career progression or with colleagues, etc. When we're dealing with our interlocutors from other nations to forward the mission of the US government, that part is not harder because we are women of color or Black women. The point you're making are absolutely spot on. And as I did say, you know, I may have been called an angry Black woman, but I have certainly been an angry Black woman from time. So it's fair enough, because people do bad things, they do unkind things, they do underhanded things. And certainly in the Department of State, I don't want to make anyone very sad, but you know, everyone I worked with, those were friendly colleagues. They were not friends, they were competitors, because in the department, the system is you are competing with everybody else at your grade for a grade above and possibly a grade below for a position, for a promotion. So I suppose that's why people do not great things, because if they make you look worse, they, in comparison, look better. Yeah.
So I'm curious, let me pick up on this and then we'll come back to this sort of strategies. You know, one of the questions actually the students had posed had to do with, let's call it, I think they used the word tokenism, the extent to which people perceive, or maybe it is the case that people are merely are treated as if they were tokens or ignore. I'm curious whether that that resonates with you in terms of the way in which you're, if nothing else, in the way in which you were perceived by your colleagues as you're only there because you are sort of a token, or because but and somehow not as deserving as being there. Is that something you felt in your careers?
You don't have to explain to us, we know. Yumi?
Actually, I've never felt tokenized, so maybe I'm lucky in that way, but I just feel like I've really worked hard and really deserved what I've received, right? So, I mean, one of you, I think it was you, Gina, who said, or maybe it was Elmira, who said, the biggest competitor is yourself. And so where I've gotten today, where I've been, is I really don't think it was because I was tokenized, but because of the work that I've delivered. And I mean, I can stand by the work that I've delivered.
Yeah.
Well, let me pick up. So let's follow up on that in terms of we were talking about the strategies you've all used and to navigate and to deal with the challenges that you've faced. I mean, Yumi, you were just talking. I mean, you say a bit more about that. I mean, it sounds like from your perspective, you've focused on yourself. Your biggest competitors yourself, really focusing on your own capacity, and maybe in that way somehow ameliorating the impact of those who may not perceive you that way. But is that say a bit more about your own strategies in addressing the challenges you faced?
So I think that just looking back at my resume, what I've done. Also, I was a Peace Corps volunteer, proudly, as was CD Glenn, and I believe, Gina, you are a Peace Corps volunteer. So that brings a lot, I think, to the table for me, as well as being an ICAP fellow. But everybody always talks about your networks and your relationships and how important ICAP is as a network, and even before ICAP, I was involved in an Asian Pacific American Federal Foreign Affairs Council, which exposed me to the work at the State Department, a lot of mentors who mentored me, but really I think I boiled it down really to three things, right? One is the relationships, and this means the networking, having somebody who you could really trust, and making sure you know who you can't trust. Don't think you could trust everybody, because that messes you up a lot. It messed me up. But really developing those relationships, and I mean, even to this day, especially to this day, in the very highly political position that I'm in, it's really who are my relationships, who's my network, who can I trust, and then and also my relationships that I've developed with the groups around me who I serve. So I serve a lot of the community-based organizations and their communities, and so really engaging with the people I serve and how we develop a trusted relationship there. So that's one. The other is to making sure that I delivered on whatever I said that I was going to deliver at, and with quality, and even if that meant working those long hours that we all do, but really just delivering and producing on what we said we're going to produce, better than what anybody else can do. And then the third thing that's really been important for me as a strategy is really being grounded in your own mission, in your own why. And I work with my team when I do my leadership, my trainings and my staff trainings and my meetings. We always start with, what is your why? What is the purpose that puts you here? And just making sure I'm grounded in those values, and with those values is how I've come to develop the mission of this office with my team, obviously, and with the mandates that I have, but really to push forward and ensuring that our communities who we are really fighting for equity are really represented, and their voices are represented, and they get to participate in order to be included. So those are sort of my three strategies. I just wanted to say one more thing that's kind of a strategy. I'm sorry. And this reminded me, because seeing Gina here also reminded me, because I think you said this, Gina, but in your Senate confirmation hearing, I was just so proud of what you said about DEI also including access. And because I've worked for the Disability Rights Fund and philanthropy, and really pushed for disability rights and access around the world, I've brought that into also my work, and to really include the access for people with disabilities, to ensure that we are also inclusive, and talk about intersectionality, to make sure that we do talk about access for people with disabilities as well.
Right.
1 in 4 of our population. That was you, right, Gina? You
Yes.
said that. Thank you. I was so happy. I just remember that feeling of just watching you in your confirmation hearings.
That's great. Great shout out for that. Thank you for that. And thanks for sharing your strategies. Elmira, your reflections on this, and the ways in which you articulated many of the challenges, and the fact that you've always had to work harder, et cetera, et cetera. How have you, what have been your strategies in sort of coping with that, or addressing that, navigating that?
So I spent about a decade ago, I spent a lot of time with entrepreneurs around the world, and I wrote a book about it. So I spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley, and there's something that Mark Andreessen said, be so good they can't ignore you. And that really stayed with me, and kind of looking at, well, what were these people doing? And they were creating meetups, and they were kind of organizing things. And I thought, well, I don't need to wait for someone to invite me to something. I can start my own, dinner party, network. And I did. And so I launched Foreign Policy Interrupted, which is now Interrupter. It's a weekly newsletter. I hope all of you will sign up for it. It's Interrupter with 2 R's on Substack. And for a while, I was also offering workshops on op-ed writing for women. And it's interesting, when I first started it, I had a very clear view on, what were the challenges of women getting on the op-ed page. And I really bought into the whole myth that, women didn't raise their hands and they lacked confidence. And as I got talking to the women that were coming into these networks, what I actually realized is we all are confident, and we have been brainwashed to believe that we're not, and that it's actually the system that, when we raise our hands, punishes us for raising our hand and going out there and speaking up. And I say that particularly to women, and particularly women of color. If we raise our hands, we either get ignored, we get threatened, we get called names, and we get labeled, and we get pushed back, and we're either made irrelevant and put onto the margins, or someone steals our ideas. And as I kept hearing this, I was just like, this network is so profoundly important. And I've invested in it to the point where now I have over 6,000 subscribers. And I think the one strategy that I realized is I've created my own network and my own community where I can amplify women's voices, and where we can all have a discussion and actually reflect on what is happening in the world without any of kind of the, do you deserve to be here? And, what are your qualifications? Because I'm already starting on the slate of like, you belong here, and I want to hear what you have to say.
Right. Oh, thank you for sharing that. And I just very quickly want to remind people that in the audience that we're going to turn to questions from you shortly. So if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. We'll come to those. Let me ask one last question, which is really about ICAP, and picking up on a theme that several of you have talked about, the importance of allies and support and networks. To talk about, if you would, just a bit about your experience with ICAP, both in the initial fellow phase, and then through your careers of being part of this community of ICAP fellows. And let me start with you, Yumi, because you've been in the middle of all these conversations. So let me start with you.
Yeah, ICAP really supported me. First, it was an amazing experience to be with like-minded folks. And this was when I think I was at either Peace Corps headquarters or World Bank at that time, but really have a really strong network that continues to this day. And I just remember being with Sandra and Des and Robert and just creating something of a network of like people who we could just call upon at any time to say, hey, I have this issue. What do I do with it? Or I need some help developing something. And Des, who's no longer with us, but just calling him up and saying, hey, how do I do this? And he'd always have all these resources, as with Sandra. So I mean, it's much more than sort of a and even to this day, we have diversity declaration or diversity matters, really looking at ways we can make an impact on some of our political systems. Our systems change, and so it's just a great network to just bond with and hang out with and see Sandra once in a while when I go to DC and just knowing that you could just pick up the phone anytime and they'll be at the other end of the phone, and I think I could say that for, people I don't even know from my other classes as well.
Yeah, thank you. Elmira, your thoughts?
I have to say, ICAP was very pivotal. I'm not as active as other members are. Just given the nature of my life, and I'm also based in New York, though we do have a sizable community up here as well. But I have to say, I think it was very formative for me because it was, again, it was important to actually be in a room of people who were experiencing and feeling the same way I was, where we had a passion for international affairs and we wanted to really contribute, you know, in a really constructive way, and in a meaningful way. And, you know, being able to see that I wasn't the only one, and seeing, you know, Gina and Yumi, who came before me, as well as other people in the ICAP network, I think for me it was just reassuring that there was a community and that I wasn't the only one. And the things that I was feeling or thinking to myself, like I wasn't having this conversation with myself in my head.
Mhm.
Right, thank you. And
Yeah,
Ambassador,
I'm gonna
you've been so
second.
involved with ICAP, not just in the initial, but I know speaking and meeting and engaged with the program for a long, long time. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it was career making for me. So I give a lot of credit to ICAP. I attended at a time when I was afraid that there really wasn't a place for me in my chosen profession. I had thought I had a position locked down, and at the last minute, it wasn't, and I was going to have to do something I wasn't so interested in doing. But everything for a reason, y'all. Everything for a reason. When you think it's not, there's for a reason. I'll explain very briefly. So I was demoralized and depressed and thinking I was going to have to find a new job when I got to ICAP. And the two things that it does is as Elmira said, I spend so much time being the only one in the room to walk into this room at the time, maybe 20 Black and brown people, and going, whoa, my God, look at this, was wonderful. And so the intellectual conversations that we had, I was much younger then, I could drink and stay up late and still be functioning in the morning, was heady stuff that we solved or addressed many issues of the world and futures and DIA and all the rest of it. And then the other part, of course, is the career counseling that you get. And it was ICAP that clarified for me that I absolutely was in the right place, that this career is indeed for me, that I can succeed at it and go as far as I want to go, which I did. My mom was a constant, don't let the bastards get you down. And so having that in my ear is a really handy thing. And she remains in my ear. And that is why I give so much time and energy and free speaking, because my speaking rate's $10,000. I just want you to know, free
We
speaking
appreciate that.
to ICAP because it did so much for me. And each and every one of us has the responsibility and the privilege to pay it forward. And that's what this is about. So.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you for that. Well, let me turn. We have some questions here. One from Kayla Anderson. Hi, Kayla. Our alum, former ICAP grad assistant. I think I know she says greetings to everyone, in particular to Ambassador Abercrombie-Winstanley. So she's asking. You know, having been young and in international affairs prior to formalized DEI policies being implemented, what advice do you have for young professionals, women of color, Black women in particular, to help push for this structural change without becoming burnt out? How have you been able to successfully get buy-in from colleagues who are all, quote, busy?
Well, I know we'll all have our own perspectives on this, but having been doing it for the last 3 years or so, frankly, my whole career is to remember. And we had study after study sent to us. We carried out in the department, the most conservative federal agency, maybe except for the Defense Department, and every single group, male, female, non-binary, Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, mixed, everybody wants to belong to an organization that recognizes people for merit, that rewards the work of ensuring that people have a level playing field and that people are made to feel welcomed and valued and desired for what they bring to the table. White men want that too. Do not doubt it. And so even as we individually struggle in these spaces, it is important that we all know we are not alone. Your colleagues want that too. So I think that should help, that reminder, and having that conversation, can we do better here for ourselves, for this organization? And I used to say at State, when I was giving talks about it, we must work to make this organization deserve us, because we are all amazing, amazing people. We are putting in hours and passion and commitment. And when the organization does not take care of each and every one of us as we should be, it does not deserve us. And we have to make it so. So that's how I keep going. People will disappoint you, absolutely, constantly, daily. And you're just going to have to put that aside, because people will also hearten you constantly, daily.
Right. Let me ask you I'm particularly interested in the the subtext or the question here of whose work it is to push for the structural change, because I do think sometimes that is work that is pushed onto persons of color and women and others to be the ones doing the work, as opposed to people like me. So I'm curious of your reactions to that part of the question, but any reactions at all to Kayla's questions, and either of you might.
I can kind of take a stab at that one. So the work that I'm let's see, the question is, what advice do you have for young professionals to help push for structural change without becoming burnout?
Yeah.
Just to recognize that burnout is a real thing. That's for one. So to make sure that you do have things that you do to make sure that you know what you need to take care of yourself. Take those breaks. This weekend I took a break. I went to go visit a friend, and I think I just took naps. But really, I mean, naps are important. But really to know what you need to be able to not burn out, right? And sometimes you might just need to take a break. And then the structural change piece, it's not easy. I mean, that's what I'm trying to do right now, is to make a systems change and a structural change within our state government. But it's really finding out who your allies are, both hidden and unhidden, both hidden and overt, and just trying to be able to figure out how to, again, it comes down to relationships for me. In order to make any kind of structural change. I mean, that's what we did at Disability Rights Fund. It was really being a grant maker to make those structural changes, and knowing that it takes a lot. It's not something that happens immediately, right? So you have to brace yourself also for the long term. But knowing and then celebrating all those little milestones along the way. My colleague in state government took us out for drinks the other night, saying we hit a milestone. We had our first meeting. It's like just being able to just recognize when you do hit that milestone, to make sure that you do thank people and you congratulate yourself, most of all, to know that you've come one step to that change that you're trying to make.
Oh, nice. Thank you. And Elmira, thoughts for Kayla?
I mean, we can go on to the next question. I mean, I don't really have much to add from what Gina and Yumi had to say.
Okay, great. Well, the next question is about some topic that was mentioned in passing, at least, but from Jesse Kalambai, Have any of you dealt with imposter syndrome in any of the spaces you've occupied? And how do you navigate that in predominantly white spaces, especially when our very existence is very existence is constantly under scrutiny? You want to take that first, Elmira?
Sure. Yes, I mean, imposter syndrome, I think I suffer from that a lot. I still suffer from it. Um, I, I, but I always recall, I mean, I suffer from it less. I think it was definitely something that gripped me when I was much younger. I think it dissipates as you get older and you get more experience and you rise up in your career. But I do remember something that my mother said. When I was setting out, I wrote a book about 10 years ago. And my friends were encouraging me to write a book about what I was seeing around the world with entrepreneurs. And they were encouraging me, and I was telling my mother this, and I said, isn't it ridiculous? They think I should write a book. And my mother said, it's not ridiculous. You should write a book. And I stopped, and I was like, but who am I? And she's like, you're somebody who explains things to me, and and she said, you don't make me feel stupid. She said, she's like, you write the book for me. And it was a real reminder of how I need to get out of my own head and look at the things that I can bring to the table and the experiences that I've observed and the things that I know. And it's actually about communicating that to people who are eager to receive that message. But the other thing that I learned in not only writing the book, but then starting my newsletter is I get notes from young women all the time who say, your newsletter means so much to me, or, students of mine who say, it was so wonderful to have you as a professor, is that you are then inspiring someone in turn. And so while I don't think that we should all, Yumi, you mentioned, we're not representatives of the groups that we come from, but we can inspire people who are looking for that role model and paving the way. And at every turn, I know that it is sometimes you get into the room and you think, my God, everybody's scrutinizing me, and they think, do I deserve to be here? Just know that you are paving the way for someone else, so that there are more of us in the room in the future.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for those thoughts. I'll ask Yumi to comment on that, and then we're almost at time, so we'll come to you next. Yumi,
yeah, I just love what you just said, Elmira. But one of the things I just need to recognize is that we all brought our mothers into the room.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nice.
And that's all.
That's it. Oh, good. Yeah. Well, that's good advice too. Ambassador, your thoughts on?
Oh, I think Elmira said it very, very well. Very well indeed. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we are just about at time. I just, any last thoughts that you would have, especially for any of our students in the audience who've been listening to you about about their careers that you would like to share with them, and to help them think about strategies and ways to cope with burnout or the challenges that they face, or dealing with people who don't recognize them, or whatever. Just last thoughts before we have to go.
Right. And I did see the question about Peace Corps. It certainly deepened my understanding about where I wanted to specialize. I'd been a student abroad at Tel Aviv University, and so I had a very distinct point of view, as you can imagine, after a year living in Israel, and then doing Peace Corps in an Arab country. I think added balance and insight, and I think has helped me navigate the career that I chose. I also got a husband out of it, so that was good too. So I'm all for Peace Corps. I be true to yourselves, don't let the bastards get you down. And my mom used to say, don't sweat the small stuff, and it's all small stuff. You know, I've had an amazing career. Some of you know me, have heard me speak about it. And in my amazing career, you know, I laugh when I see my resume sometimes. I've been fired 3 times. I have been fired, told to go home. We don't want you anymore. There's nobody who is successful in this world who hasn't stumbled, who hasn't fallen, who hasn't had dark nights and some tears. The most important decision you'll make is who you're sharing your life with, because they're going to have to help you through that, through those bad times. Don't let the bastards get you down. I knew what I came to do, decided to do it. So
That's great. That's great. Yumi, last thoughts?
I just wanted to recognize also those of you who are here, just really commend you for the just for even thinking about careers in foreign affairs as a person of color, as a woman of color, and just really encourage you to stay that path. I did also recruitment for the field for the field of international development, international affairs. So really encourage you all to like stick with it. It's amazing. It's you just learn so much. You just get to see so many things. The experiences are just really amazing, and I'm just grateful for the opportunity that I've had, and I hope that each of you also continue on this path.
Great, thank you. And Elmira, I'll give you the last word.
I always end the semester with giving my students advice, and they're always asking me kind of, what would you tell your 21-year-old self? And as we kind of close this out, I think the one thing that I would have told my 21-year-old self is that it's about progress, not perfection. You know, you just need to make improvements every day. And I think, you know, Gina, you put it aptly. You're going to fall, and you're going to fail, and you're going to cry, and life is going to be hard. But it's about getting up and learning the lesson and moving forward. And that takes a lot of persistence. It takes a lot of courage, and it takes a lot of conviction. So go out there and make progress, and not try to achieve perfection. And as Yumi pointed out, I think it's important to build community and find your people. And then to close out, I'm just going to sum up everything that my co-panelists have said. What Gina said about, you know, be true to who you are, because you do have to go to bed with yourself. And I think the only person that you really need to make sure that you're okay with is your own conscience.
Well, great note to end on. Thank you so much. Thanks to those of you in the audience for joining us today. Thank you so much to all 3 of you for sharing your experiences and for your time, and indeed for your work, for your example, the things that you have done and are doing with your lives, which is so inspirational. So thanks so much for being with us. Really appreciate it.
our privilege. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye now.